Okay, let's get right into it. We're talking about imaginary numbers today. Now, that name alone sounds like something made up, right? Something abstract and useless. But I promise you, their origin story and their impact on the real world are way more surprising and practical than you probably think. So, if you remember high school math, you were probably told that imaginary numbers were invented to solve this exact problem: x squared plus 1 equals 0. I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? You need some kind of number that, when you square it, you get -1. But that's not the real story. Not even close. You see, for hundreds of years, mathematicians were totally fine just saying equations like x squared plus 1 were unsolvable and just moving on with their lives. The real problem, the one that forced their hand, was a much bigger beast: the cubic equation. It was equations like this one that kept spitting out square roots of negative numbers, even when the final answer was something totally normal and real. And the story of how they cracked this doesn't start in some quiet library. Oh no, it starts in 16th century Italy. And it's a story packed with rivalries, public math showdowns, and what one of the key players called mental tortures. This whole thing plays out like a drama. In the early 1500s, a guy named Del Ferro secretly solves a specific type of cubic equation. After he dies, his student, Fior, challenges another brilliant mathematician, Tartaglia, to a public contest. Tartaglia, under all this pressure, actually figures out the formula himself and wins. Later, he tells the formula to another guy, Gerolamo Cardano, but makes him swear an oath never to reveal it. Well, Cardano goes ahead and publishes it anyway in 1545 in his book Ars Magna, and that kicked off an absolutely epic feud. And you can almost feel Cardano's brain hurting right here in his own words. He was the first one to really try and wrestle with these things. He'd set up a problem like find two numbers that add to 10 and multiply to 40. The formula gave him these bizarre answers you see here. But even though he called the process mental tortures, he had to admit that if you just gritted your teeth and followed the rules, it worked. But here's the real breakthrough. A man named Raphael Bombelli is the one who finally made sense of it. Remember that cubic equation from the beginning? Cardano's formula for it resulted in this absolute mess involving the square root of -121. But Bombelli knew the actual, real answer was just 4. His genius was realizing that these two weird imaginary parts weren't a mistake. They were real, and they were designed to perfectly cancel each other out, leaving behind the simple, solid number 4. So Bombelli showed that these numbers were useful, but nobody, and I mean nobody, understood what they actually were. For the next 200 years, they were like a mathematical ghost, a weird trick that somehow gave you the right answer, but for reasons nobody could explain. Taming this idea was going to take a while. And here's the guy who gave these numbers their terrible name, René Descartes. This quote says it all. He's the one who called them imaginary. And trust me, he meant it as an insult. He was basically saying, sure, you can imagine these numbers, but they're not real. And that name stuck, wrapping them in mystery for centuries. So the problem was that everyone was trying to understand the square root of -1 using the same old number line. But the number line just goes left and right. It's one-dimensional. The big breakthrough? The solution wasn't going to be another formula. It was going to be a picture. They needed a new dimension. All right, now we get to the really cool part. This is where it all finally clicks into place. This is the moment where a few brilliant minds, including the legendary Carl Friedrich Gauss, finally gave these so-called imaginary numbers a proper home. And here it is, the complex plane. The idea is so simple, it's beautiful. You take the regular number line we all know and love, that's the horizontal axis for the real numbers. And then you just add a vertical axis. That's for the imaginary numbers. All of a sudden, a number like x plus iy isn't some weird abstract thing. It's a point. It's a location on a map. And once you can see numbers as points on a map, the old rules of math become totally visual. Look at this. Adding two complex numbers is literally just like adding two arrows. You just follow one and then the other, and wherever you land, that's your answer. It's totally intuitive. But this is the truly mind-blowing part. What does multiplying by I actually do? Well, it turns out it's just a rotation, a 90-degree turn to the left. That's it. So think about it. What happens if you multiply by I twice? You rotate 90 degrees, and then you rotate another 90 degrees. You've just turned 180 degrees around. You're now pointing in the exact opposite direction. And what does multiplying by -1 do? It points you in the exact opposite direction. That one simple picture makes the whole I squared equals -1 mystery just vanish.
Okay, so this geometric view wasn't just pretty, it was unbelievably powerful. It blew the doors open for using complex numbers to solve really hard real-world problems, especially in a field where things are constantly oscillating and rotating, like electrical engineering.
And I think this quote from Reddit is just so relatable. We've all been there, right? You're told in school that this stuff is useful, but nobody can quite explain how. Well, let's fix that right now. Because for electrical engineers, complex numbers aren't just useful, they are, as this person says, pure magic. The whole secret comes down to one word: impedance. You can think of it as resistance, but for AC circuits. Now, in AC circuits, you have components that make the current and voltage go out of sync with each other. So impedance isn't just one number, it's a complex number. The real part is the plain old resistance you know, and the imaginary part, called reactance, handles that out of sync behavior. So what's the big payoff? Well, you could try to analyze an AC circuit the hard way, which means solving a bunch of horrible differential equations. It's a total nightmare. Or you can do it the smart way. You represent all the oscillating stuff with complex numbers, and when you do that, all that painful calculus just melts away and becomes simple algebra. The good old V equals I times R becomes V equals I times Z. It turns hours of work into a few minutes. And hey, you don't have to take my word for it. This user nails the experience of pretty much every engineering student. Professors will deliberately make them do it the super hard way first, just so they can truly appreciate the incredible power and simplicity that complex numbers bring. It really is a game changer. So by now, I hope it's crystal clear that these numbers are anything but imaginary. They went on an incredible journey from being seen as an impossible, nonsensical paradox to being one of the most essential tools we have for describing reality. And their use goes way beyond just electrical circuits. Signal processing, the tech that makes your phone, digital music, and streaming video work, all built on complex numbers. The fundamental equations of quantum mechanics. The imaginary number I is literally written into the fabric of the universe at the smallest scales. From making sure bridges don't collapse to generating mind-bending fractal art, they are absolutely everywhere. And I think this quote from the great Carl Friedrich Gauss just sums it all up perfectly. He basically argued the whole problem was just bad marketing. If instead of calling them positive, negative, and imaginary, we had just called them direct, inverse, and lateral, nobody would have ever been confused. A number that means take a step sideways is a lot less scary than a number called imaginary. And that kind of leaves us with one last big question. The story of imaginary numbers is the ultimate proof that an idea can go from seeming like complete nonsense to being totally essential for understanding the world. It all just came down to finding the right picture. So you have to wonder, what other impossible ideas out there are just waiting for the right perspective to change everything?